tell you, if you don't know me, my name is Perry. So now that we're properly introduced, let me set the stage for where we're at in Luke. And I'm going to tell you we are in Luke chapter 20, verse 45. And I will say that multiple times this morning so you don't need to whisper to each other and say, where did he say we are? Luke chapter 20, verse 45 is where we're going to be. But I'm going to start back at the very beginning of the chapter, verse 1. And we're going to take kind of a running start at this, and I need a lot of runway. So in chapter 1, we see Jesus teaching and preaching in the temple. So he's in a very public place with his ministry right now. And for the last couple of weeks here at church, we have seen Jesus and the religious rulers of the day kind of going at it, battling with each other. I should just talk. All right, I'm just going to talk to you. So I just want to say, they've been going at it for quite some time. I was reading yesterday in Mark chapter 3, and it's funny. Early in Jesus' ministry, early on, we have a story about Jesus being in the synagogue, and the religious leaders are watching him. They're keeping an eye on him because there's a guy there with a withered hand, and they want to know, what's he going to do? It's the Sabbath. Is he going to heal? They've been going at this from the very first day that Jesus went public. So this is nothing new to Jesus. This sort of contention with these guys has been going on for quite some time. In verses 1 through 8, we see the chief priests and the scribes come up and ask him, but what authority do you have to do this, to say these things, to do these things that you're doing? And Jesus turns it around on him. He says, I'll tell you what. I'll tell you if you tell me. If you tell me, was John the Baptist from God, from heaven, or from man? And they look at each other and they say, If we say he was from heaven, he's going to say, why didn't you believe him? If you say, he was from man, well, the people believed he was from heaven, the people will stone us. So their response to Jesus is kind of, and Jesus says, well, then I'm not going to tell you where I'm from either. In the next scene, we see this parable of the landowner, the vineyard owner, and the people that he's hired, the tenants, to go ahead and take care of that vineyard. And they're not paying their rent. They're not paying their portion of what the vineyard is producing. They're not honoring the landowner. So the landowner sends representatives. He sends his servants to go collect rent. And they don't treat them real good. They beat them. They send them back home. This happens a couple of times. And finally, the landowner, he says, well, I'll send my son. And this is a great picture of God the Father sending Jesus the Son to his people. He says, I'll send my son. Surely, they'll honor him. They'll do the right thing. They'll do what they need to do. Well, the people, the tenants, they see the son coming, and their response isn't, oh, look, God's son. It's, let's kill him and take the vineyard for ourselves. Well, they decide to do that. The landowner, the response that Jesus tells them is, well, he's going to come back, and he's going to deal very harshly with these people, and he's going to take the vineyard away, and he's going to give it to somebody else. Well, where is Jesus again? You can say it, temple. Right, he's in the temple. All these chief priests, these scribes, these religious rulers of the day hear him say this, obviously. And they become a little put off. I mean, if I were a lesser man, I would probably use lesser language to describe how they felt. They weren't happy. They were mad that Jesus would say this to them. And they're like, oh, surely not. Well, surely so. Jesus responds back to them, and he looks directly at them, and he says, what then is this that is written? The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. Everyone who falls on this stone will be broken to pieces, and when it falls on anyone, it will crush them. So moving on in chapter 20, we get to verse 19. And as I said, the authorities are pretty upset at this point. They decide to come up with something else, a way that they can trap him again. And so they send some spies. One of the things I read in my huge time to prepare this thing was that the spies were actually Pharisees that they sent in. We don't know that. But they sent spies in, and the first thing that the spies say to Jesus is, "Teacher, we know that you speak and teach rightly, and to show no partiality, but truly teach the way of God." How many of you think Jesus bought that? Yeah, me either. I don't think he bought that for 1 second. But they come up with a ploy, which I think in their minds they thought was very much like what the chief priests and scribes, what he did to the chief priests and scribes earlier. When he turned them around and asked them, well, what about John the Baptist? They're going to put him in the same kind of situation here. They bring him a coin. And they say, "Teacher, is it lawful for us to pay tribute to Caesar?" And here's the deal. The Jews hated the Romans being there. Even though, if you know your Jewish history, in 161 BC, Judah Maccabee brought Rome in, invited them into the country to help them deal with the Seleucids. They don't like them being there. After 200 years, they're sick of them. So the people don't want to be paying taxes to Rome. They don't want Rome meddling in their lives. On the other hand, you've got the Romans there. So these guys are thinking, no matter what he answers, he's doomed. If he says, yeah, it's lawful to give, pay to Caesar, the people are going to turn on him. They'll stone him. They'll get rid of him. If he says, no, it's not lawful to pay tribute to Caesar, Romans aren't going to be too happy about that, and they're going to haul him off. So what's Jesus do? He asks for a coin. He says, whose likeness is on the coin? They say, well, Caesar's. And he says, give to Caesar what's Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. So again, they're probably not real thrilled with him because everything they've tried so far, and if you look at this as a day, they have been trying and trying and trying to trap Jesus and to somehow get rid of him. Well, we get the Sadducees joining the party now, still in the temple, and they come up and they ask Jesus a question, and they sort of create this musical, I think you've heard of it, One Wife for Seven Brothers. They come up with this scenario. There's a musical called Seven Wives for Seven Brothers for those of you that are young. They come up with a scenario where a guy marries a woman and they never have any children and he dies, and Mosaic law says, well, his brother is supposed to take her as his wife and raise up children for him. Well, the second brother marries her. They don't have any children. He dies. The third, fourth, it goes on through all of them. And they say, well, Jesus, whose wife will she be in heaven? Again, trying to put him in a position where it's going to confuse him, where it's going to have him thinking, well, what do I say here? Well, Jesus tells him flat out, he says, look, what goes on in heaven isn't the same thing that goes on here. You're not going to be given in marriage in heaven. And he also tells them, there is a resurrection, because as we know, the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection. And he says, look at what Moses said when he talks about being the God of Isaac, the God of Abraham, the God of living people. So he does explain to them that there is a resurrection. And that gets us to where we are this morning, verse 45, chapter 20. And we're actually going to delve into chapter 21 as well. So if you're there, you can read along with me. Verse 45. And in the hearing of all the people, he said to his disciples, beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, love greetings in the marketplace, and the best seats in the synagogues, and the places of honor of feast, who devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation. And then continuing in chapter 21, Jesus looked up and saw the rich putting their gifts into the offering box. And he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them, for they all contributed out of their abundance, but she, out of her poverty, put in all that she had to live on. Now, I know some of you will look at this and say, well, this is a passage on giving, on sacrificial giving. And I could see where you would think that, because it kind of is. I'm not going to take it that direction. Not totally. We'll come back to the giving, but we're going to look at a different aspect of this, I think, this morning. The way I look at this passage is there are 3 different actors, there are 3 different characters here, right? We've got the scribes, 1. We've got the rich people, there's 2. And we've got the widow, that's 3. Who are the scribes? The scribes were, as I said, religious rulers of the day. And they were actually quite a bit like Pharisees, only what I understand, they were 2 distinct groups, but they kind of overlapped a little bit. They had similar roles and they had similar ideals. These were the people that the populace would come to and have questions answered about the Mosaic law. These are the guys that would instruct the people on how they should be living and what the word meant. These were the people, if we think about it, these were the guys who ended up laying what we call heavy burdens on the people. These were the guys that took something like, you shall keep the Sabbath day holy, and turned it into, you can't walk more than 30 feet if you're carrying a glass of water on the Sabbath, right? They tried to explain what it meant to keep the Sabbath day holy by adding things to it, by adding burdens to the people. And the big difference between a Pharisee and a scribe, as I understand it, is that Pharisees were sort of part of the general populace, right? They were business owners, they were landowners, they were landlords, they were just part of the village. They were guys that had studied and had achieved a level of knowledge and level of respect amongst the people, but they were kind of the people. The scribes, on the other hand, I think you can think of scribes as lawyers, right? If you needed a contract, are you a lawyer? If you needed a contract written, you would come to a scribe, all right? So that would be the dividing line between the two. Other than that, they lived their lives, it looks like they lived their lives pretty similar in fashion. And one of the things that these guys really liked was their position in society. We know from ancient text, ancient 2,000-year-old text, that they loved being greeted in the marketplace with the term rabbi. Oh, rabbi, how are you doing? It was a greeting that put them above everybody else, right? It was sort of this puff them up. They wanted to hear it. That's the kind of people these were. If you characterize their hearts, let's look at what else it says in there. There's a phrase in there that I looked at and I thought, what is this talking about? They devour widows' houses. What in the world does that mean? So I started looking into it, thinking about it. And what it really means is that phrase talks about this idea of basically throwing a widow out of her house so they could take the house over and do something else with it, whether they wanted to rent it to somebody at a higher rent or they wanted to tear it down and do something else with it. They had no problem taking a widow, throwing her out of the house so they could make some money on this place. They could do something for themselves. That's what Jesus is describing here. Pretty low person. So they're high in society. They like each other. They like hearing their name be called rabbi. And they're kind of evil. And if you look at the last thing it says, and finally for a pretense they make long prayers. What does that mean? That means for appearance sakes. In order that people would think highly of them again and think, oh, those guys are something else, right? They would make the long, elaborate prayers. They would be, setting themselves apart from the general person. If you look at their hearts, they're in it for the glory. They're in it for the recognition. They're in it for the power. And hopefully, you don't identify yourself as one of these kind of guys. But I think we've all run across these kind of people. We've all run across people that consider themselves above us. We've run across people who have no problem in doing just horrible things. We hear on the news people taking money from people with fixed incomes, ruining their lives, and they don't think anything about stealing from them. Well, if those kind of guys anger you, good news is you're right there with God, because he wasn't real thrilled with them either. And that's why he says they will receive the higher condemnation. The next group, this one hits a little bit closer to home, the rich. So, as Doc Holliday said to Kate, cover your ears, darling. Rich people, how did they give? They gave out of their surplus. And when we look at the passages in here, we don't see Jesus really taking much notice of them. Yes, he mentions them. He says they give out of their surplus. He says the widow gave more than them. But he really doesn't say a whole lot about them. He doesn't look at them. He doesn't condemn them. He doesn't say anything really about them. Most of us, if you look at us kind of generally, most of us probably live above our means. Most of us are not living like this widow. We're probably living closer to the rich people, where giving is not really a hard thing for us to do. We have money, we can afford it, and we do it. Now, I'm not putting that down because I think that that's a great thing that we can do that. For me, for you, I'm hoping it grounds us, and hoping it reminds us that God has blessed us. We have incredible blessings in our lives. And it's great for us to remember, and it's great for us to give back to God in that act of remembrance and that act of thankfulness. But if we're truthful, I think we understand that it's really easy for us to do that. Most of us probably don't give sacrificially. We give out of gratitude, we give joyfully, but we probably don't have to give sacrificially. And I think that that's where these people are. If I look at a spectrum of, really, really evil and really, really righteous, I expect there's a bell curve right here where these guys are running. They're not horrible people. They may not be the most righteous people either. Again, it probably fits pretty close to where all of us are sitting here. Well, the last actor here is the widow. And what does it say about her? She received some pretty positive recognition from Jesus. She puts in her two small coins, and Jesus points her out to the people in the temple, right? Or in the temple. He points her out and says, she just gave more than these people who are putting in their sacks of money into the offering boxes. So he acknowledges her. What did she do? She gave out of her poverty. She gave money that she couldn't afford to give. A lot of us could look at that and say, well, I could give everything right now. Maybe not me, not as old as I am, but when you're young, I could give everything, and I've got time to make it up. I've got time to recover. I've got time to get that bank account back to where it needed to be if I do something like this. She wasn't in that position. She's in a position of, I'm giving up everything I have. I don't know where my next meal is coming from, or the one after that, or the one after that. I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to keep a roof over my head. But she gives her 2 coins. I mentioned earlier I didn't think this thing was about giving, and I don't. I think it's about heart issues. Heart issues, and I am reminded of a couple of different Old Testament verses, two of my favorites, and I'm going to embarrass Dusty because Dusty made me so proud Thursday night in our small group when she actually quoted one of them, quoted the Shema, which is Deuteronomy 6:4, and it starts out, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your might." And the other one is Hosea 6:6. Jesus quotes this verse twice in Matthew 9 and in Matthew 12. And he says, "For I desire steadfast love and not sacrifice, the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Both of those verses talk to heart issues. They both talk about what God desires from us. What God desires from us is that we love him. We return the love that he has given us. We recognize who he is, and we want to be in relationship with him. We don't keep him separate in our lives. We don't back away from him. He wants us to love him. So I got to tell you, I got I don't know how many hours notice that I was going to do this. Friday noon, that's what I was told. And yesterday afternoon, I'm working through it, and Lorraine's not here, so I can talk about her. She's probably listening in the nursery. If you hear her yell. She said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, I think I've got 2/3 of it done." And I said, "I just got to," you've heard the phrase, land the plane, right? I went away and I did some more work, and I came back out, and she said, "Well, how'd you do?" I said, "Well, did you get the plane landed?" I said, "Yeah, I did, but it was it fell out of the sky." So we're going to try to land this plane a little more gentle than that. I did come up with some stuff, but it was a little bit scary yesterday afternoon. I don't mind telling you. All right. So let's go back and look at the heart issues here. We talked about the scribes and where their hearts were where? Their hearts were on themselves. Their hearts were on their glory, on their status, on their position, on their wealth. That's where their hearts are. Jesus said to us, it's not what goes into the body that defiles it, all right? It's what comes out of the heart that defiles us. We look at the Pharisees, we look at the scribes, and we think, how could these guys lead these people astray? How could they be so wrong? How could they be so against Jesus? I mean, I'm known for cutting these guys some slack, but the reality is what they're doing is coming out of their heart. What we're seeing them do, trying to trap Jesus, trying to get rid of Jesus, trying to put him away, is the outpouring of their hearts. That's what's driving them. And our next set of actors, we talked about how they gave out of their abundance. And I told you that I think in a spectrum of really, good and really bad, they were probably somewhere in here, with the bulk of them being somewhere in the middle. And I expect that many of them reflect the reaction that Jesus had to them. How did Jesus react to them? He didn't really react to them at all. He noticed that they put in their money bags, but he didn't say anything about it, really. He didn't point them out. He didn't, it was kind of like a non-event. And I just wonder, with these people, as they were putting their money bags into the offering boxes, if it was kind of a non-event for them too. How often is it that we give and we don't really think too much about what we're doing or why we're doing it? It's just something we do. I think for them, a lot of this was probably, it's something that you do. You go to the temple, you pay your tithe. That's what you do. I'm not sure how many of them did it out of joy, did it because they wanted to do it. Jesus doesn't, we don't get any clue about what there's going on in their hearts, but it just seems like it's kind of, they gave their money and they move on. And I think that reflects their hearts. I think they were obedient to the point where they were doing what they were supposed to do, but I'm not sure that there was this relationship that God is calling them to. And that brings me to the widow. What sort of relationship do you suppose the widow had with God? I mentioned earlier, here's this woman, poor, probably poor. Widows weren't known for being rich, who gives all she had, her 2 small coins. And as I said earlier, she doesn't know. She doesn't know where her next meal is coming from. She is scraping by day. She doesn't know if she's going to have someone throw her out of her house. She doesn't know. What prompts somebody to give that way? It comes out of relationship. I think the fact that she had a relationship with God that was that close, that she loved him and she wanted to be with him, that she was willing to give everything she had. I think that's what drives her to do that. I don't think it was anything else with her. It certainly wasn't for recognition or anything like that. And I said this passage wasn't about giving, but I'm going to say something about giving anyway. A lot of people give. I should say, let me change that. A lot of people don't give. And I'm not just talking about Calvary. I'm talking about church in America. If you look at numbers, a small percentage of church attenders are what support the church with their giving. A larger body of people really don't give. And that's endemic of all churches across America, I think. We're pretty blessed here at Calvary. Our giving has been phenomenal. But I would say this, and I'm going to say this because I'm not a pastor here. I don't receive any of the money that comes in. So I feel free to be able to say this. If you're not giving, I would ask you to examine your relationship with God. Do you love God? Do you want to be with God? Do you want to spend time with God? Is your desire to draw closer to God? Ask yourself that. I think our giving comes out of our hearts. When I picture, I'm going to go back to the widow a little bit. When I picture this widow giving, I don't picture her making a big deal about it. She could have done a number of one things. She could have, come in crying, wailing. She could have been doing anything. I picture this widow walking in, putting her money in the box, and walking off. I don't think she made a big deal out of it. I think she was just doing what she needed to do. It wasn't about her. It wasn't about her and the priest. It wasn't about her and the temple. It wasn't about her and the people around her. It was about her and God. I think she was grateful to God. I think she was grateful for her existence. I think she was grateful for God's existence. I think she was grateful that she knew she had a God that she could rely on. When I tell you that she didn't know where her next meal was coming from, I think she knew exactly where her next meal was coming from. It's coming out of her relationship with God. She knew that God would take care of her. I mean, how else do you do it? How else do you voluntarily give up everything? So, we have landed the plane. And I'm going to tell you that if you don't have that relationship, if you don't know what it's like to love God, if you don't even know how to get started with loving God, talk to me. Track me down after the service. Track any one of the people that are standing up here down after the service. Track, Rick will be up here, Bob will be up here. Talk to one of us. If you don't know how to have that relationship with God, talk to one of us, and we will be happy to explain it to you. Pray with me. Father, we are so grateful for your word. We thank you for this opportunity to read it, to apply it. We thank you that it is alive today as it was when it was originally written. Father, my prayer is that if your word spoke to anybody here today, that you would give them the courage to talk to someone about it. Lord, we thank you for your Son. We thank you for his redeeming work on the cross. And we thank you for the relationship we can have as sons and daughters with you because of it. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.